Dr. Young, and I'm going to go over your last week's assignments. Can you believe it's almost over? These terms go by so fast. So for your discussion this week, you're going to play the role of a new manager. And you have an issue coming up between some of your employees. The previous manager that you are replacing, had a transactional leadership approach. It's been relatively ineffective. So what you need to do is kind of consider the situation and talk about the kind of leadership that you would take in the situation, using some of the traits of your chosen leadership style to solve the issue, or at least to try to resolve the issue and come to some type of understanding. So the scenario here is that you have an experienced executive assistant has discovered she made the same amount of money as a newly hired janitor. Consider the role the Human Resources Department plays in driving organization performance, and what HR strategies would you employ to address this? So you need to kind of consider that. And to keep people motivated, there's also been a shift from annual to semi-annual bonuses. So you have to consider whether you feel that semi-annual bonuses is a good way to motivate, and what are some problems with that approach, and what other strategies would you use. So this seems a little bit disjointed maybe when you first read it, but what I want you to do for this assignment is to talk about how would you handle that scenario, and kind of talk about what kind of leadership style, first of all, would you want to espouse in this new position, and then how can some of the traits of that leadership style help you deal with the situation with the janitor and the executive assistant, and then go on from that to keeping employees motivated, and talk about benefits, but talk about intrinsic benefits, and kind of some ways that you can motivate without strictly monetary bonuses. So I want you to kind of expand on that. I do want you to talk about, what kind of bonuses or what kind of structure you use, because obviously that is a motivator, but kind of go beyond that as well in your post. And it says here specifically, if you're kind of looking for some guidelines for this post, 500 to 600 words is what you want to kind of stick around. And, you can just type it out in Word. It'll give you the word count and copy and paste it over. If you're specifically having any copy and paste issues, just let me know in an email. Of course, as usual, we have this extended. Oh goodness, I'm sorry, I have an allergy attacks this term, and I can't hardly get my words out because my throat's got a frog in it. Use the expanded rubric. That's what I wanted to say. And let me see if I just downloaded it and it didn't show up. Here it is. So just make sure that you're following this last column all the way down for the requirements. I will tell you what I notice the most is just, not enough responses, no sources supporting responses, and not enough detail in the responses. 1 or 2 sentences is not going to get you the grade that you want for your response section. You need to you need to expand on it. I know it's a lot of work for these discussions, but it is a universal. Any courses that here at South they should be using the same rubric for discussions if it's a discussion-based type of course. Let me go on to the last paper. It's the comprehensive paper. So in week 4, we talked about effective communication. Weeks 4 and 5, we talked about organizational teams. We talked about a little bit of strong and effective teams. But what we need to consider now is, what you want to do now is select a team you know very well. It could be a church. It could be I'm just putting that out there. It could be a extended, like a club, a book club. It could be work. It could be anything where you are working with a group of people to reach specific goals. So typically operates between 4 to 6. Try to keep it around that I mean, not specific. If it's a little over, that's fine. I just don't want to, don't tell me a group of, like 15 or 20 people. Sports team, I didn't see that example there. That's a good example. And you need to sit down and think about the experience that you had. Get your text out. Do some academic research at the SUO library. Newsweek. I mean, I don't care if you use credible sources. Just make sure that, I don't care if you use like some media sources, but just make sure that they're credible. Don't just, it's very hard to discern news these days, if you've noticed, and what's real and what isn't. I would stick to the library, honestly, just because you can pretty much be sure that those have what's in there has been vetted and looked at as credible. Okay, compose a 4 to 5 page APA formatted paper that addresses the following points. Again, we're kind of keeping with the same format that we have done through the whole course so far. So just kind of push through it. Assess the team's strengths and weaknesses based on assigned reading concepts. Again, we're going back to what have you learned about teams? What are some issues that can happen with teams that are inherent in teams? Talk about that. Team development, talk about how that, norming, storming, how that works, how that worked on your team. I want to see that as well. And make sure, one thing that I have taken points off for is if you've done only your text. I don't want to just see your text only cited. You need to expand a little bit from that. Defend 2 to 3, and again, that might be just a few points, but still, if you're looking for that maximum, the maximum points on the paper, you're going to need to do that. Defend 2 to 3 recommendations. I recommend 3 if you can build in the time for that when you're writing this paper. Recommendations for team performance improvement based on concepts theory. So think about how teams form. Think about how your strengths and weaknesses. Think about how they could be improved, and use concepts from the text and outside resources to determine those recommendations. Assess the level of trust evident in team interactions. Talk about your experience. Talk about your ability to work together. Talk about your level of conflict. Talk about your ability to work through problems and come to a agreement. Talk about the skill level of, talk about the ability to mediate issues and did someone step up and do that? Talk about the different roles that the team members played and how that, issues were worked out, or were they, or not. If you had a high conflict team, tell us about that. Was there personality clashes? What were, I want you to describe that trust and how that worked or didn't work in your team. Number 5, justify a leadership style which would be appropriate for this team. So make sure that when you're talking about, it's a specific situation you experienced on a team or a group, and talk about the leadership style that would work best for that group, and try to tell me why that leadership would specifically work for your group that you were in versus maybe other groups. And then defend a plan to facilitate a higher motivation level of team members. So what could, thinking back on your team experience, what would have motivated? You might talk about people that, there's people that just didn't want to do anything. There was so-and-so didn't want to carry their weight. It was all on, a couple of people, and everyone else kind of just didn't really, step up to the plate and help out and do what they needed to do, or they were late, or they just didn't fulfill their, the part of their task that they needed to do to complete the project, whatever. What would motivate those that weren't as motivated? What do you feel would be a good plan? Come up with a motivation plan for those that may not have seem to be as vested into the goal as, some of the others were. So that's what I want to see. Here's the rubric, and this has a dynamic, large, expanded rubric. And here's your exceeds expectations column. So as you're doing your assignment, use this as a checklist. Pull it up. Download it. Use it as a checklist as you're going through your paper. When you're done with your draft, go back through it. What are you missing? What's not addressed? This is a good method of making sure you meet all the requirements for this assignment. And I would recommend doing that for any class, because most of them will have at least a couple of assignments that will have the expanded rubric on it. So just some tips. Make sure to proofread carefully. Make sure you're following APA style. Please use the resources here in the left course menu for APA. There's a sample paper. If you go into it, it will help you with the format of your paper. I highly recommend that you use it. It's very useful. APA is something that you're going to continue to see over and over and over again, and especially if you ever go into a graduate level program, you will use that you will be expected to know it very well. So just, practice makes perfect. You just practice and practice through each class, and eventually it just becomes kind of a second nature. It becomes very easy to do, but it does take practice. It's very specific. So if you have any questions or concerns, let me know. I'll be happy to assist you. It's the last paper. It's worth the most points. Take the time to do it carefully, thoroughly, carefully, and proofread is all I can tell you there. Questions, if you have any questions as it comes, as you're working through the paper, maybe working through the research, text me. That's the quickest way to get a hold of me. Of course, email me if you'd like. You can call me too, but leave a message if you call, and what school and what, and obviously your name. But you can text me as well, and I just say that because sometimes I'm somewhere where it's noisy or I can't just stop and talk, but I can text. So, and anytime. You can, even if I don't respond to you, if it's like 2 in the morning, I might be asleep, but I might very well be awake. So, knowing me. So, just let me know if you need any assistance. Thank you and have a great week.